I'm Brian Dashner, and we're going to do a pump assembly today with a 7 ml with an 8-inch motor bracket. Show everybody how we can build and then tear down a submersible pump. Okay, we're going to start. You have to have the right tools. We have a setup tool that goes on the motor bracket, a collet knocker. You have your wrenches for bolting and the shaft bolting. You're going to start with a clean and straight bowl shaft. Needs to be within 2 to 3 thousandths inch straightening. We start with your straight and clean shaft. Place it in the motor bracket through the motor bracket bearing. The bearing's already been placed in to the motor bracket. You have your all thread here that screws into the bottom of the shaft. Then you pull the bracket, your setup tool, up to the bolt holes to bolt this solid to your motor bracket. You got to make sure all these bolts are tight, because that's the set of your impeller into the impeller skirt area. At a later time, we're going to loosen this also and then retighten it to make sure you don't lose, because this all thread could possibly stretch when you're beating the collet into the impeller. We're on to the next step. We're placing the impeller into the motor bracket, putting the first collet. Use your screwdriver. You need to try to open up that collet a little bit. Okay, that collet then should slip easier onto the shaft. Now you use your collet knocker, the small end. It's a little more difficult when you have a short shaft. Okay, we got that first impeller set. Now, what you want to do is check the tightness on your shaft again. Make sure you didn't stretch the shaft, the threads a little bit, to be sure you're holding down that impeller all the way to the bottom. So we make sure we're going to have the right set on that impeller stick up on the projection. Now, put in our intermediate bowl assembly. The bearing's already been pressed in. We've already put anti-seize on the bolting. This 7-inch pump is all ductile iron. We use all 18/8 stainless steel bolting, so once they've been in the well, years later when you want to repair it, the bolts don't deteriorate and it's easy for repair. Once you get them all tight, you also use a rubber mallet and make sure that you've got all these bolts tied on the unit. It's also a good thing that if you ever get one of these units complete from the factory, once it's traveled several hundred miles, that you also tighten these even when you receive an already built pump from the factory, because in travel, especially if you have a long pump, these bolts can come loose. Now we're ready to put in the next impeller. It's just a repeat of what we did before. We'd already tightened the setup tool, the shaft again. Okay, we've got that impeller on. One thing to note, you can assemble these pumps in the vertical position, make you a stand that allows for your awl thread that holds the shaft and the setup tool, but sometimes it's also easier to do your collet and collet knocker in a vertical position. We have a pump bench, but I just wanted you to know that you could do this in a vertical position. Next step, we're going to put on the next bowl, which we're only building a 2-stage here, so I already have the discharge of the pump bolted to the top bowl. If we were building a 3-stage, 6-stage, 10-stage, we just repeat what we just did. One of the other things also though is if you do multi-stages, at about 3 or 4 stages, I would take loose your setup tool and spin the shaft to make sure that you have no tight bearings, so you don't complete your pump and then find out that you have a tight shaft. So from here though, all we have to do on this 2-stage, we already set our second impeller. Now we have our discharge bearing already pushed in to the discharge, the top bowl and the discharge. And so now it's just a repeat of bolting in or bolting up this unit as we did previously. Following the same bolting, use the wrench, then the hammer to slightly tighten the bolts. We want to snug all these tight. We've done the rest. Okay, now we have 2 types of up thrust protection. This particular pump is built with an up thrust plug, which screws into the top bearing of the discharge that we just put on. There also is a thrust ring that what you place is once you place that impeller on there, that last impeller, you place the up thrust ring on, then place this bowl of discharge, and you will have an open top, which lets the water pump through the top bearing. So once we get this, now we have to check the shaft rotation. We're going to take the setup tool completely loose. Now we need to check your shaft rotation to make sure that the shaft's turning okay, properly. This shaft turns perfectly smooth, completely 360 degrees with no problem. The other thing you want to check is your up thrust, is the amount you move, the shaft is able to move in the up thrust position, which is about 1/4 of an inch on this pump, which is fine. So now we're ready to install the motor coupling. Okay, we're applying the 8-inch motor coupling, which you place the key in the shaft. On an 8-inch motor coupling, there's no spacer between the motor shaft and the pump shaft. So at this point, you just push the 8-inch motor coupling to make sure that both set screws engage the key and tighten, because this coupling will have to be adjusted once it is set on the motor. So once you place this pump on the motor, this coupling is loosened, and make sure that the motor shaft butts on the pump shaft and then is tightened. You've completed building the pump. There's a few things you need to check again. Make sure all your bolting's tight. Make sure your shaft turns free, and make sure you have your lateral correct. So this pump then is ready for shipment or to assemble to the motor. Now remember, on 8-inch only, the motor coupling will have to be readjusted once the pump is mounted onto the motor. 6-inch motor couplings have a spacer, and you just push it flat to the motor shaft and tighten, and it's a one-time operation. But with 8-inch, you're going to want to adjust this once you mount to the motor.